In this episode, we'll talk about Brazil. Brazil is famous for its iconic Carnival of Brazil and its talented soccer players like Pelé and Neymar. Brazil is also known for its tropical beaches and the Amazon rainforest. Did you know that Brazil is bordered by almost all South American countries, except of Ecuador and Chile? So let's learn more about Brazil and its culture from our guest, Tom. Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be on. It's always interesting to speak with people actually from so far away. And appreciate the way that you contacted me and asked me to be a guest on the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And for people who will be listening to this podcast for the first time, we're speaking from Tajikistan and you are in Brazil. So the time difference is 8 hours.
Right. It's my morning and your afternoon.
Yeah. Could you please talk about yourself a little bit first? What do you do and where are you from?
Okay. Well, actually, I'm from Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania in the United States. But I'm speaking with our audience today from Brazil. I live in the city of Campinas in the state of São Paulo in Brazil, and I've been here for over 50 years. So some people say I'm more Brazilian than American, but when I first came here many years ago, I came after graduating from the university, and I had a chance to travel throughout the country. And actually at that time traveled by bus to most of the state capitals and saw much of the country. And throughout my business career, has also traveled throughout the country extensively. So I can say that I do know the country well from a foreigner's perspective.
Oh, okay. And did you learn the language after you arrived or you already knew Portuguese?
And now I learned it actually after I arrived. One of my surprises was that before coming, people had said, no, everybody speaks English there, but that's really not the case. It wasn't and still isn't. People don't speak English. Only 3% of the population today actually speaks English. The language here is Portuguese. So actually to get around and to survive, I had to learn. And learning a language, I guess that's the same everywhere. We repeat sounds and hope they come out right. And if they don't, sometimes you're surprised. But what I did find when I came, that people were friendly and understanding and receptive to the fact that I didn't speak the language. So at that very beginning, through mimicry and even the travel throughout the country, I didn't speak. But was able to travel, get around. I went with, at that time was my girlfriend, now my wife. She's Brazilian. But even in that, she didn't speak English. So much of our communication was mimicry, hand signs, and what have you. But in the end, it all works out.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. I think that's the best way to learn a language because you have to speak.
I agree with you, but as travelers, as you are travelers, sometimes when you're on a trip of 1, 2, 3 weeks or whatever, you don't necessarily have all that time to learn. I had to learn because I stayed here and had the opportunity. But my suggestion to any, and today's technology helps us all at least have an idea of languages or translation mechanisms on a smartphone. So that it does today. It's easier to travel, I think, than it was when I was here.
And does she speak English right now, your wife?
Oh, she speaks, but this is interesting. I only speak to her in Portuguese. She speaks to me in Portuguese. When we had our children, I only spoke to our children in English. They only answered me in Portuguese. So it was and until today, it's that way. So I speak to them in English and they answer in Portuguese. So we understand each other. But if anybody's close to us that doesn't speak either English or Portuguese, it's strange. But that's been. I says I can only teach my children to learn English by speaking. And really, as you know, understanding a language is hearing it, right? Even if we speak it and it's not correct, people who understand the language will help you be clearer. But if you don't hear it, if you don't understand what's being said, that's a problem.
Yeah. I haven't heard Portuguese much, so I can't compare it with Spanish. Is it very different from Spanish?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, all right? It's for many people, let's say non-Spanish or Portuguese speakers, Some of the words are the same. They're exactly the same, but they sound different depending on the way or who's saying them, okay? What is a fact here in Brazil that most Portuguese, most Brazilians will be able to understand someone when they're speaking Spanish. But the reverse isn't the same, because I've traveled throughout South America and Europe, Spain. Spanish speakers don't understand Portuguese. So I'm not sure why, but that's the fact. So when Brazilians travel and they think they can speak Portuguese to a Spanish speaker, it just doesn't work. Here in Brazil, and because Brazil is a frontier with many Spanish-speaking countries, there are people who use what is called portunhol. So it's really a mixture of Portuguese and Spanish. But if you look at it and read both languages, they're very similar. It's about how you say them, the words, and how people hear them. That was my problem at the beginning. I came here as an American speaking English, so I was used to hearing English-sounding words. There are words in Portuguese that are the same as English, but they're pronounced differently. I couldn't understand that. People say, no, I'm saying the same word. But it's like, no, my ears are picking up something different. So when I would read the word, then I could understand the word. So really, when I started learning the language back then, it was obviously speaking, but I listened to the radio a lot. I would listen to news on the radio in Portuguese, and I would read the newspaper in Portuguese, so that I would be able to see a word and hear a word and put them together and then understand them better. So that did help.
I see. Tell us, please, how do you guys greet each other there? Do you hug each other, shake hands, or kiss? How do you do that?
Brazil, it's what I call a huggy, kissy environment. People do hug and do kiss each other. And so men, obviously, if you have a friendly relations with someone, you will give them a hug. You can even kiss a man. So for an American coming here years ago, that was strange. But Brazilians are friendly. They're considered friendly in that aspect. But a very quick hello, what we would say oi or alô or como vai, which means how are you? And generally, once people do know you, and that could be very briefly, they'll give you a hug. Women may kiss you. And then there's always a question here in Brazil of how many kisses do you get? In certain parts, there's one kiss on each cheek. In Rio, you may get 3 kisses, one on one cheek and then another 2. So it's interesting to get used to. Americans tend to maintain a distance. This was even today. It's sometimes a more pronounced distance. People don't like to be touched by other people. Sometimes that's a problem. But here, Brazilians will touch you. Put their hand on your arm, they'll put their hand on your shoulder. And so that's very common. And obviously some cultures that may be a surprise, but that's the way it is. And you'll see people doing that naturally amongst themselves, and they don't necessarily have to know each other. So,
and what do you think might surprise foreigners, apart from kissing and hugging? Anything else?
Brazil's a very large, physically large country. It's continental. Many times that's the first surprise, and really how big it is. And it's really like you can, from the north to the south is almost a 5-hour airline flight. So traveling by air for an hour, 2 hours is no big deal here. From where I live to go up to Amazon, which is the jungle and the Amazon River, that's a 4-hour flight. So when people come, they say, well, I want to see 12 different places. I don't want to say it's not possible, but you can imagine traveling from where you are to London and trying to stop in 12 different countries along the way. So it doesn't necessarily work out that way. So understanding the geography is a surprise. Another thing, the technology here is very high. It's world class. Transportation is as well. Sometimes people are surprised. Well, I mentioned years ago when I traveled by bus. Over the highway buses are very good, high quality. So that is a way for people coming really to get to know the country better, is to take a bus between cities. So the highway excursion type buses are top quality. Very clean, hygienic. Normally, you can get overnight sleepers if you want. So it has been, and that's something to look for. Brazil is also an exporter of buses to the world, so very top notch. Obviously, airline travel is good, but because of the size of the
Yeah.
country, not all municipalities have an airport. So travel by bus, fly, renting a car is possible, but today with maps and Waze and what have you, it's easier. But it's a good country to see. Another thing, as we just said, is the
Yeah.
friendly atmosphere of people, but gastronomy. So food is good and diverse, and also the diversity of
Hmm.
cultures. There are many types of Brazilians, many types of people have made up Brazil. What may surprise some
Hmm.
is that the largest Japanese population outside of Japan is in Brazil.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Asians, there's a lot of Koreans, there's a lot of Chinese, obviously a lot of the different
Hmm.
European cultures. In different times, Italians have come here, Germans, the Polish. So it's a great mixture. And so it's sometimes hard to
Yeah.
identify, who's a Brazilian or what a Brazilian looks like.
Oh, and you mentioned some things that might attract other tourists. And some of our friends, they have been there and they said that some parts of Brazil might be dangerous. But I'm curious why so many people are still attracted to visit Brazil. Is there something unique about Brazil?
Today, and unfortunately in today's world, and that's everywhere, uh, there's danger
Hmm.
everywhere. All right. You just need to be aware of that. I don't think we could say that there's a place that isn't dangerous or safer. So I'm not sure if to our listeners, wherever they are, you have to be
Hmm.
aware first, and that comes of learning a little bit about of where you're going. Obviously, let's say the headlines of the danger of the criminal activity, that's always in the headlines. Obviously, anywhere there are places that I wouldn't recommend you would walk by yourself if you don't know where you are, and specifically don't know the language. So many times you're in a position you're not even aware if it's safe or not because you don't speak the language. So learning before, but there are many hotels, hostels. There are many people who come and backpack, and bicycles are convenient, and people like to take a bike trip or a motorcycle trip or whatever.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's a good advice. And one interesting thing that I read about Brazil, they say that it's quite common to be late, and some students they afraid that they're not afraid that they might not pass the exam, but they are afraid that they might be late. Is that true?
They might be late.
Yeah, they might be late for 15 minutes, and after that, they need to come next year.
To your point of being a student,
Oh.
which is different, the college entrance exams are
Hmm.
generally held in universities or public places. And a hopeful student or a candidate has to be on time. So if the entrance exam is
Yeah.
to start at 1 p.m., at exactly 1 p.m., they lock the gates to the school. And that's not uncommon. But
Mm.
Brazilians have a different, they're more flexible in understanding time. So
Yeah,
obviously,
I
if you're
see.
traveling by flight or a bus, as I mentioned, there are timely arrival and
Oh.
departure times. And
Hmm.
that's pretty much respected in the context of travel, okay? But in general,
Yeah.
meetings amongst people, if somebody invites you over
Mm.
and say, well,
Okay.
come over to my house and we're gonna have a barbecue. First of all, they don't even tell you when to come. But if they do, well, when should I
Yeah.
come? Well, whenever you feel like it. Maybe for you, you think it's a good time at 12 o'clock. Maybe noon is the time you'd like to eat. But you can go, and they'll hug and
Hmm.
kiss you. But there may not be any food at 12 o'clock because they'll
Yeah.
wait for everybody else to show up, and people may come at 2. So you may be waiting for 2 hours. But that's the way it is.
Yeah. I see. It's pretty much the same here in Tajikistan. When they say 1 o'clock, everybody comes at 2. So it's quite common.
Yeah, and one thing back, the city of Sao Paulo, which is 100 kilometers from where I am, Campinas, where I live, has over 1 million
Hmm.
people. The greater area is 3 million. But the city of Sao Paulo, with almost 20
Yeah,
million people, traffic is horrendous. So it's sometimes physically difficult to get somewhere on time. And it has always been that way. So really to say it's a 9 o'clock a.m. meeting, uh, it may be tough for you to get
hmm,
there. And it may also be tough for the person to get there. So, and
yeah,
that's pretty common. In most cities, that's it. Public transportation could help, but being late is not considered something wrong.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. I've read that taking care of body is a big deal in Brazil, and they're kind of obsessed about that, having a good body shape. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Is that true?
Well, yeah, I want to say yes. Generally speaking, yes. Why? Brazil, and that one of the things that attracted me to Brazil was the extensive shoreline. All right. So from north to south, there's beautiful beaches. Most of the capitals of the states in Brazil are on beaches. All right, they're on the coastline. So the an outdoor beach type culture lends to that. So people are out, and here in Brazil, the men will be in shorts, the women will be in a bikini. They'll be out running, swimming, playing volleyball, playing football on the beach. So the physicality is highlighted everywhere. The natural involvement in, let's say, appreciation of the physique is there. People are practicing sports, they're riding their
Yeah.
bicycles, they're doing things. So they hope to preserve themselves. I think that's just natural. That's natural life. I don't live by a beach where I am, but people are out running in the park,
Yeah.
walking, doing things. Most parks here have all kinds of equipment so that you can do a workout. So uh, that's part of the
Yeah.
culture.
Oh, that's good.
And that gets back to the weather.
Yeah.
The weather is generally good, all right, compared to other cultures where you have intense winters. Most of Brazil doesn't have an intense
Hmm.
winter. We're in the southern hemisphere. Right now, we're in our winter. But right now, here where I live, today will probably be 32 degrees during the day. That's Celsius, so it's going to be very warm. We never get freezing weather here. It can get chilly, maybe 8 degrees, 9 degrees Celsius. In the southern part, it could get to freezing. You can
Yeah.
see a little bit of snow, but that's rare. So, and it's generally sunny
Hmm.
most. But one of the attractions to me personally coming to Brazil, it was always sunny. I lived in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh was cloudy all the time. I know you live in a country that
Mm.
where you live, your city seems to be very sunny, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it
about
is.
300 days it's sunny.
Yeah, so you can imagine, not to say anything bad about London, but I would go to London, and people would when the sun
Yeah.
would come out, they would go crazy. They'd take off their clothes and run in the street, and it might be 10 degrees on. I said, "Wow, these people are crazy!" But no, they wanted to see the sun, and so for us and
Yeah.
you, having sunshine is natural. So, and that's a
Yeah.
cultural difference, and it's good.
Yeah, that's true. If you could choose three aspects of your culture, I mean, I'm talking about Brazil, to put in a time box for the future, what would you put in it?
Well, back to the point we just mentioned, I probably would say beaches, beaches, beaches. Now, I would add to that one of the attractions to me personally when I came, and still is music. Dancing. Brazil
Mm.
is the music, Brazilian music, the Brazilian samba, the Brazilian carnival, street dancing is something that should be seen and should be not only seen, you should involve yourself. So worldwide, many people have heard Brazilian music. They appreciate it. I appreciate it. I liked it. It's one of the things that still attracts me. And it's become modern, but the classical Brazilian music is still something that I would hope to remember forever. And the gastronomy, so the different food cultures here. So you can really eat a vast
Yeah.
variety of different types of things. So anybody coming here will
Hmm.
certainly be able to find something they would like. There are typical dishes in different areas of the country. They're all good. So you can find something that you will enjoy. And it's not so different from other cultures in the world. So that's the friendly thing. And that's back to the cultural mixes here. So music, gastronomy, and beaches would be the three that I'd put in a box.
I see. And you mentioned Carnival. Can you please explain when is it celebrated, and also maybe a little bit about Ash Wednesday? What is that?
Well, Ash Wednesday is actually the beginning of a religious period, and it is on a Wednesday. It changes yearly because of the calendar. This coming year in 2022, Carnival will start on the 25th of February. And normally Carnival here sort of starts, and it depends on the city, the Friday before. The theoretical holiday in the country would be the Tuesday, which outside is called the Fat Tuesday. But here, that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, which would be Ash Wednesday, would be street dancing, would be partying. And theoretically, Carnival ends Ash Wednesday at noon, where historically that would be the time for religious factors. People would become more reserved. That doesn't happen anymore. So most people take that whole week as a holiday. That's a very intense time. So generally, let's say Carnival would start on the Friday before Ash Wednesday and would go for the following weekend. So you get 7 to 10 days of intense dancing in the street and what have you. And that's throughout the country. It's highlighted because most people may know it because of Rio de Janeiro, which is highlighted, Sao Paulo, but most major cities, and not only major cities, most communities have some type of carnival events. Even in a small municipality, people are out celebrating. So it's throughout the country. Salvador, which is the capital of Bahia, which is another state, and Salvador and Bahia has the richest Afro culture in Brazil. And that's so that's part of the origins of much of the music in Brazil, and also the dancing. So if anybody were to come to Brazil for Carnival, I would definitely suggest they come to Salvador to see that. It's not something you have to see, you have to be in it. All right, you have to experience it.
You mean participate?
Yeah, get out in the street and dance, and
Wow.
No, I've done it, so I can tell you, it's like sort of like going to Mars. It's really different and amazing. And back to your point of being safe. All right, my understanding is, wow, this seems to be an organized riot, right? But what I found is different. It's highly organized. Obviously, if you know what you're doing, you get in the middle of that. And for some reason, people seem to be friendlier and safer during Carnival. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. Everybody wants to enjoy themselves, and they want other people to enjoy themselves. So that has always struck me wherever I've gone. So for anybody to say, well, I want to go to Brazil once, come during Carnival. Come to Rio, come to Salvador, come to Recife in the north, for anywhere. Come and see that, experience it, get out in the street, dance.
What are the other misconceptions people have about Brazil?
I think the main ones we covered. Many people think that the language is Spanish and it's Portuguese. Still today, many people that I talk to think that the capital of Brazil is Buenos Aires, which is in Argentina. The capital here is Brasilia. Many years ago, the capital was the city of Rio de Janeiro. That's where it first started. But Brazil is in the middle of the country. That was a capital that was started from nothing in the middle of a savanna. And that's the capital. That's also a city worth seeing from that standpoint. Another misconception that many people think that here is it's all jungle, that there are snakes and wild animals everywhere.
Amazon.
There is a lot of jungle. The Amazon is out there. It's huge. All right. but that's not all Brazil.
Yeah.
And the jungle and the Amazon is also a place to visit. So coming to Brazil, Manaus, which is the capital of the state, and it's in the middle of the Amazon River, that's another whole unique experience of seeing a massive river like the Amazon, seeing the jungle, seeing how that is.
Yeah.
That's an experience. But those are generally the misconceptions.
Yeah. And I know that watching TV series is quite popular in Brazil. Do you watch also?
Do I watch what? Excuse me?
TV series, they are quite popular in Brazil.
TV series, the novellas, the soap operas.
Yeah. Do you watch at 9 p.m.?
No, I personally don't. But millions of people do. And that's historic. And so here on the TV channel, right after the evening news, which depending on the channel is either at 8 p.m. or 7:30 p.m., right after each of those channels will have the soap opera, the novella as they're called. And people will, families will be in front of that watching. That's a pretty typical Brazilian custom and still goes on. And that goes back to when I first came here years ago. And we're talking about communication. Most communication at that time was by radio. Television was something new in Brazil in 1970. When the first televisions came out, people had television, that was a communication. That was the entertainment in-house. And that's where the novellas, the soap operas started and have remained popular until today. But I personally don't watch them. But it's a good way to learn Portuguese if you want.
Yeah, exactly. The TV series Friends, of
Yes.
course. It really helped us a lot because when we were learning English, so that was one of the way for us to improve our English through watching that Friends.
Well, I agree with you on that. For our listeners, if they wanted to hear or listen to Portuguese or watch people speaking Portuguese, and today you can get into channels anywhere, that's a good thing to do. Because you not only hear the language, you see the language being used in a modern fashion today.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to say I've never watched it. There were series that I did watch that were very culturally oriented. And I learned much about the Brazilian history from watching many of them. Until today, several of those show history, show cultural interact. Salvador, which I mentioned to you, and Rio is one of the focal points for generating these novellas. So for a foreigner to watch these or listen to them would be educational.
Yeah, and is there anything else left worth to mention before we wrap up? Maybe there's some tips or maybe something about Brazil that worth to mention.
There's so much out there. And Brazil outside is written with a Z. It's Brazil. But Brazil is written with an S. It's Brasil. So if you make a search with Brazil as an S, Brasil, you'll probably find more Portuguese language-oriented things about Brazil than if you put Brazil, which will show you an English orientation of Brazil. So that would be my first suggestion. But because of, like yourselves, your podcasts on YouTube, there's so much access to everything. And there really isn't one thing that I could say that's the deal. First of all, the country's so expansive. It's so culturally diverse. There's so much to see. It's really, it would probably be not correct on my part just to say, oh, go here and see that. It might not be true from a point. But anything that you can see would be worthwhile. Specific programs about Amazon, about the interior, not only city life, but the natural resources that Brazil has. Fantastic. Mountains, beaches, whatever. So there's just some agriculture. So people interested in agriculture, Brazil's the agricultural leader of the world today. So there's just a whole lot to see here or learn about the country.
Definitely. Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing about Brazil. Thanks a lot.
Well, I want to thank you. I enjoyed the participation. I want to commend you in what you're doing. I think helping spread information about cultures, about traveling, is the key to people in the world. People want to know, and they want to hear from somebody who knows. So both you and your brother know, and you're helping others learn. So I want to commend you on that.
Oh, thank you. And where should people go to find more about you?
Well, if I want to find more about me, I have a link called Linktree, Link, and then it's tr.ee/Tom Reaoch, TOMREAOCH. And there they'll be able to find all different types of links to my own podcast, to other things I've done. LinkedIn, where I'm on, and invite anybody who wants to connect to me, connect there. So that's probably the best place to find me.
Yeah, and also if they want to learn more about business in Brazil, they can listen to your podcast.
I have two podcasts. One is Talk to Brazil. Talk to Brazil is an English language podcast about business. I have a second called BBN Brazil. That's Brazil with an S, but those interviews are in Portuguese, generally interviewing Brazilian business persons. And my third podcast is called Café and Networking. That's a shorter version, more directed to a pitch or a plug for a product or an event. And that's in both English and Portuguese. So it's through those three podcasts that I try to reach people, educate people about not only Brazil, but business in general. And specifically, one of my strong points is networking. So I'm considered in Brazil as the king of networking. So I try to join people.
Wow.
And so now most of my networking connections are global. I know more people outside, on LinkedIn specifically. The majority of my connections are throughout the world. So that's helped me through my career. It helped me like with you, talking to you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a believer of networking, and I'm a believer of personal relationships, however they come about. All right. If you're not found, all right, if people don't remember you or can't find you, it's not that you don't exist, but you don't grow.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Tom, thanks again for joining us today. And until next time. Yeah, until next time. Hope to see you one day in person.
Well, whatever, virtually, in person, it'd be my pleasure. Maybe if you want to come down for Carnival, that'd be the time.
Yes, sure.
But you're always welcome.
Okay.